Imagine millions of threads spun from silk and wool, dyed with secrets woven with gold. Imagine these threads coming together, not just to make cloth, but to capture an entire world. They held secrets of power, whispered stories of triumph, and displayed wealth beyond belief. For the Habsburg emperors and archdukes, these weren't just decorations. They were silent, colossal declarations of who they were and what they commanded. Some were so big they needed entire rooms to just be seen. Some were so intricate their details could drive a person mad with wonder. These are the untold wild stories of history's most unbelievably complex tapestries, artworks that moved kingdoms and defined an era. Number 10. The history of Cyrus the Great. Young Philip II of Spain, still just a prince, already carried the weight of an empire. He admired a good story, especially one about a powerful ruler who knew how to get things done. So in the bustling workshops of Brussels, around the year 1547, a new project began to take shape for him. It was to be a series of tapestries telling the epic tale of Cyrus the Great, the legendary founder of the Achaemenid Empire. This wasn't some gentle bedtime story. This was a narrative about conquering leadership and the rise of a vast domain. The designers, likely from the famed school of Coecke van Aelst, drew up massive cartoons. These weren't just sketches. They were full-scale paintings, often broken into pieces, showing every single figure, every architectural detail, every fold of fabric. The weavers in the workshop of Willem de Moyen and his partners then translated these designs into the language of thread. Imagine their daily grind, thousands upon thousands of tiny choices, selecting the perfect shade of blue for a distant sky, or the precise shimmer of gold for a king's crown. The series explored key moments in Cyrus's life, from his humble beginnings to his military victories and the establishment of his mighty empire. One scene might show Cyrus as a child abandoned but destined for greatness. Another would burst with the chaos of battle, horses rearing, swords clashing, banners flying. There were moments of quiet diplomacy too, showing Cyrus as a wise and benevolent leader, not just a conqueror. These tapestries, destined for Philip's palaces in Spain, served a silent purpose beyond mere decoration. They were a visual textbook for a future king. They presented a model of ideal kingship, strong, decisive, victorious, but also just. They were a constant reminder of the virtues a ruler should possess to maintain and expand his dominions. When Philip became king, he could walk through rooms adorned with these stories, absorbing the silent lessons woven into every thread. The tapestries were a kind of classical education on a grand textile scale, meant to inspire and instruct, linking Philip to the great rulers of antiquity, and subtly suggesting his own imperial destiny. They are still, today, a powerful testament to the ambition and intellectual curiosity of a young monarch poised to rule half the world. Number 9. The 12 months. Sometimes the grandest stories are found not in battles or biblical epics, but in the rhythm of everyday life. Around the mid-16th century, a magnificent set of tapestries known as the 12 months, or the royal months, began to take shape in Brussels. While not directly commissioned by a single Habsburg ruler, this kind of series was immensely popular and quickly found its way into the collections of the emperors and kings of the dynasty, reflecting their taste in the cultural climate of their court. These weren't about a single hero. They were about the slow, steady turning of the year each month, getting its own monumental tapestry. The designs, often attributed to the workshop of Jan van Orley, captured the essence of each month through a vibrant tableau of activities, landscapes, and allegories. January might show a grand feast. People gathered around a roaring fire, shaking off the winter chill. February could depict ice skating or wood gathering. As the year progressed, the scenes would change. March with its planting, April with its blossoming flowers and courting couples. Summer months exploded with harvest scenes. Farmers toiling in golden fields, noble ladies strolling through gardens. Autumn brought the bounty of the hunt and the great harvest. while December returned to the warmth of indoor life and celebration. Each tapestry was a world unto itself. The foregrounds were rich with human activity, showing common folk and nobles interacting, sometimes in idealized ways, sometimes with a surprising realism for the time. In the background, the landscapes unfolded, revealing meticulously detailed trees, rivers, and distant castles. Astrological symbols often floated in the skies above, tying the earthly activities to the celestial clockwork. What made them truly intricate was the sheer amount of detail. Every leaf on a tree, every feather on a bird, every pattern on a dress, all were rendered with astonishing precision by the weavers. These weren't quick studies. They were slow, deliberate compositions, meant to be admired up close, to reveal new elements with every viewing. For the Habsburgs, who moved between various palaces, these tapestries provided a familiar, beautiful cycle, a constant, comforting presence that celebrated the abundance of their lands and the ordered world they sought to maintain. They stood as a beautiful, silent calendar marking the passage of time in the most luxurious way possible. Number 8. The story of Noah. Imagine the greatest natural disaster in history captured, not on film, but in threads of wool and silk. That's exactly what happened with the story of Noah, a breathtaking series of tapestries commissioned by Emperor Charles V. Sometime in the 1540s, while managing an empire that stretched across continents, Charles decided he needed to fill his palaces with stories of epic scale and moral weight. The biblical tale of Noah, a man chosen by God to save humanity and the animal kingdom from a cataclysmic flood, was a perfect fit. The designs for these colossal hangings were probably drawn up by an artist closely associated with Coecke van Aelst, a master known for his dramatic compositions and vivid storytelling. The weavers of the workshop of Willem de Pawnmaker in Brussels then embarked on the monumental task of bringing these visions to life. This wasn't just about making pretty pictures. This was about depicting chaos, survival, and divine intervention on a scale rarely attempted in textile art. One tapestry might show the building of the ark, with carpenters hauling massive timbers, animals patiently lining up, and humans scoffing at Noah's warnings. The detail in the animals alone would have been mind-boggling. Elephants, lions, birds of every feather, all rendered with astonishing realism, each demanding specific shades and weaving techniques. Then came the storm. Another panel would burst with the fury of the deluge. Waves crashing, lightning splitting the sky, desperate figures clinging to anything that floats. The ark, a silent beacon of hope, would ride the tumultuous waters, a stark contrast to the despair surrounding it. Finally, the waters recede, the dove returns with an olive branch, and Noah and his family emerge to a new world under a rainbow, a symbol of God's promise. The complexity wasn't just in the number of figures or the dramatic landscapes. It was in the emotional depth conveyed through the silent faces, the movement of the storm, the sense of both devastation and renewal. For Charles V, a ruler deeply religious and often at war, the story of Noah resonated deeply. It spoke of divine judgment, but also of salvation and renewal. These tapestries were not just art. They were silent sermons, reminders of faith, and testaments to human endurance in the face of overwhelming odds, all woven with unparalleled skill, for an emperor who understood the power of grand narratives. Number 7. The Virtues. In the dazzling court of Emperor Charles V, strength wasn't just about armies and gold. It was also about character, about the invisible qualities that made a ruler great. Around the same time, he was commissioning grand battle scenes. Charles also wanted something that spoke to the inner life, the moral compass of an empire. This led to the creation of The Virtues, a magnificent tapestry series that unfolded like a silent sermon, woven in silk and wool. The designs often linked to the artist. Bernard van Orley imagined abstract concepts as living, breathing figures. This wasn't about telling a simple story. This was about making the ideals of good governance and personal excellence visible. Each tapestry depicted one or more virtues, often personified as strong, graceful women, sometimes accompanied by symbolic animals or objects. One tapestry might feature justice, holding her scales and sword her gaze, firm and unwavering. Another might show fortitude, standing tall amidst challenges, perhaps leaning on a column or battling a mythical beast. Temperance would pour water from one jug to another, symbolizing balance and moderation. Prudence would carry a mirror reflecting wisdom and foresight. Charity would be surrounded by children, offering comfort and care. The intricacy of these tapestries lay not in sprawling battlefields, but in the subtle details of classical drapery, the nuanced expressions on the allegorical figures, and the rich symbolism embedded in every corner. Imagine the weavers in the workshop of Willem de Pannemaker, carefully rendering the folds of a gown, the gleam of an armor plate, or the intricate pattern of a tile floor. Every element had meaning, though some of it would have been understood only by the most educated courtiers. The colors were rich. The gold and silver threads shimmered, making the virtues literally glow in the dim light of a palace hall. For Charles V, a man who believed in the divine right of kings, but also the heavy burden of his responsibilities, these tapestries served as a constant reminder of the qualities he strove to embody. They were a visual guide to righteous rule, a silent declaration of the moral foundations upon which his vast empire was supposedly built. They stood as a testament to the idea that even power needed a guiding hand of virtue. Number 6. The honors. If you were a Habsburg emperor like Charles V, you didn't just win wars. You showed the world why you won them. You demonstrated that your victories were not just about might, but about honor, justice, and divine favor. That's where the Honors Tapestry series came in. Commissioned in the 1520s, these 7 immense tapestries were about a specific battle or a Bible story. They were about the abstract concepts that underpin Charles V's rule, a grand allegorical pageant of kingship and virtue. The designs for this ground-reigning series came from the brilliant mind of Bernard van Orley, working for the famed workshop of Pieter de Pannemaker in Brussels. Van Orley's vision was ambitious: to personify abstract ideals like nobility, virtue, fame, and the triumph of time. Each tapestry presented a complex scene where these allegorical figures interacted, often in grand processions or symbolic settings. For instance, one tapestry might show nobility riding in a triumphal chariot, followed by figures representing justice and good governance. Another could depict fame sounding her trumpet, announcing glorious deeds. There were also themes like the triumph of time, where the relentless march of ages puts all earthly glory into perspective. The sheer intricacy of the honors lies in its layered symbolism and its mythological references, all woven into vast, detailed landscapes. There were not just personifications, but also detailed classical architecture, mythological creatures, and a host of smaller figures, each playing a part in the grand allegorical drama. The borders alone were a work of art, often filled with medallions, grotesque figures, and intricate floral patterns that echoed the central theme. The weavers had to interpret Van Orley's complex drawings, choosing from hundreds of shades of dyed wool and silk, adding lustrous gold and silver threads to highlight crowns, armor, or the flowing robes of the allegorical figures. The scale was immense, each tapestry often covering an entire wall. For Charles V, these tapestries were not just expensive decorations. They were a sophisticated statement of his imperial ideology, a visual declaration that his rule was legitimate, just, and destined for enduring glory. They were hung on state occasions, silently broadcasting messages of power, legacy, and the moral authority that he believed underpinned his vast, global empire. Number 5. The story of Gideon. When Philip II of Spain, son of the mighty Charles V, wanted to project his own vision of pious and victorious rule, he turned to a biblical hero, known for his faith and military cunning, Gideon. Around 1570, Philip commissioned a spectacular set of tapestries depicting the story of Gideon. This wasn't just a tale of ancient Israel. It was a blueprint for a king who saw himself as the defender of the Catholic faith against overwhelming odds, much like Gideon against the Midianites. The designs for this series were created by the celebrated Flemish painter Martin van Heemskerk, known for his dynamic compositions and attention to classical detail. The tapestries were then woven in the renowned workshop of Willem de Panmaker in Brussels, the same workshop that had produced masterpieces for Philip's father. The narrative of Gideon offered rich material for dramatic visual storytelling. One tapestry might show Gideon, a humble man, being called by an angel to lead his people. Another would burst with the chaotic energy of the battle against the Midianites, emphasizing Gideon's clever tactics, reducing his army to just 300 men, each carrying a torch and a trumpet, creating confusion and panic among the enemy. The intricacy of these tapestries lay in the meticulous rendering of military formations, the diverse array of figures, and the dramatic landscapes. Imagine the weavers grafting hundreds of tiny faces, each with a different expression of fear or determination. The gleam of bronze armor, the fluttering of banners, the movement of horses, all had to be carefully translated into threads. The series also conveyed the divine intervention that aided Gideon, subtly reminding viewers of God's favor for righteous rulers. For Philip II, a king who fought tirelessly against Protestantism and the Ottoman Empire, the story of Gideon was a powerful parallel to his own struggles. He identified with Gideon's unwavering faith and his strategic brilliance. These tapestries adorned his palaces, especially the Escorial, serving as a constant visual affirmation of his divinely sanctioned mission and a source of inspiration for his military endeavors. They were a silent, woven prayer for victory, imbued with the conviction that God was on his side. Number 4. The story of David and Bathsheba. Before the grand imperial commissions of Charles V, his grandfather, Emperor Maximilian I, had already established a Habsburg love affair with elaborate tapestries. While some older sets found their way into his collection, one particularly captivating series that became a staple in Habsburg inventories was the story of David and Bathsheba. This wasn't originally a Habsburg commission, but it was such a magnificent and dramatic work that it was highly prized and frequently displayed by the dynasty, particularly in the early 16th century. Woven in Brussels, possibly around 1510 to 1520, this series tells the compelling, often scandalous, biblical tale of King David's lust for Bathsheba, his affair with her, and his subsequent orchestration of her husband Uriah's death. The designs are usually attributed to Baron van Orley, a master of vibrant narrative scenes. The series unfolds like a grand play, with each tapestry depicting a key moment in the unfolding drama. One scene might show Bathsheba bathing on a rooftop, her beauty catching King David's eye from his palace window. Another would depict messengers going back and forth, the quiet machinations of power and desire. The most dramatic panels would show the battle where Uriah is deliberately placed in the deadliest position, or the prophet Nathan confronting David about his sins. The complexity of these tapestries lies in their narrative richness and the incredible detail packed into every inch. The weavers, working in workshops like that of Coecke van Aelst, brought to life not only the main characters, but also a bustling, detailed world around them. Imagine the ornate architecture of King David's palace, the lush gardens, the intricate patterns on the clothing of courtiers, the distant cityscapes, and the vivid expressions on the faces of every single figure. There are crowds of servant soldiers in detailed armor, animals in the background, all rendered with an astonishing array of colors and textures. Gold and silver threads shimmered, indicating the royal setting and the luxurious lives of the characters. For the Habsburgs, these tapestries were more than just a biblical story. They were a dramatic human tale of passion, power, sin, and repentance, all told with a visual splendor that echoed the unparalleled skill of Flemish weavers. They provided both a moral lesson and a mesmerizing spectacle, a silent conversation piece for the most esteemed guests in their opulent palaces. Number 3. The Hunts of Maximilian. Imagined stepping into the royal hunting grounds of the 16th century, not through a time machine, but through threads woven with unimaginable skill. The Hunts of Maximilian is a series of 12 tapestries, each representing a month of the year and depicting the specific hunting activities that would take place around the Brussels court. Commissioned by Margaret of Austria, Regent of the Netherlands. Around 1530 to 1533, these were just pretty pictures. They were a love letter to a specific place, a specific lifestyle, and the sheer joy of the chase. The designs for these tapestries were created by Bernard van Orley, who spent considerable time sketching in the actual hunting forests near Brussels, like Soignes Forest. This dedication to realism is what makes these tapestries so incredibly intricate and historically valuable. Each tapestry depicts a different month, not through allegories, but through detailed, bustling scenes of specific hunts. For January, perhaps a boar hunt through the snowy woods. For level of detail is mind-boggling. You can identify specific trees, note the different breeds of hunting dogs, distinguish the unique features of various animals, stags, boars, bears, foxes. The faces of the hunters, including many identifiable portraits of court figures, are rendered with individual expressions. The complexity isn't just in the accuracy of the flora and fauna. It's in the dynamic movement of the scenes, galloping horses, leaping dogs, fleeing prey, and the flurry of activity as beaters drive game and hunters take aim. The workshops of Jan Jubels and Willem de Panmaker in Brussels were responsible for weaving these masterpieces. Imagine the challenge of translating the fluidity of a chase into fixed threads, making horses look like they're truly thundering across the ground or capturing the frantic energy of a pack of hounds. The backgrounds are rich, detailed landscapes of the Brussels region, complete with castles and villages. These tapestries are a unique blend of art, natural history, and social chronicle, offering an unparalleled glimpse into the aristocratic sport and the beautiful countryside. For Margaret of Austria, and later for Emperor Charles V and his successors who inherited them, these tapestries were a celebration of their leisure, their land, and their mastery over nature. They are a vibrant, thrilling snapshot of a bygone era. Number 2, the story of Abraham. If you wanted to show the world your power, your piety, and your sheer ability to command breathtaking artistry, you commissioned something truly epic. That's what Emperor Charles V did with the story of Abraham, a colossal series of 10 tapestries woven in the 1540s. This wasn't just a project. It was a massive undertaking, a demonstration of wealth and taste on an unparalleled scale, commissioned for a ruler whose empire literally touched every corner of the known world. The designs for this magnificent series came from the workshop of Bernard van Orley and Peter Coecke van Aelst, two of the most influential artists of the Brussels tapestry. Golden Age. They translated the ancient biblical narrative of Abraham, the patriarch chosen by God, into a grand visual epic. Each tapestry depicted a significant moment in Abraham's life. His call from God to leave his homeland, his journey through the desert, the battle against the kings, the encounter with Melchizedek, the divine promise of descendants, the sacrifice of Isaac. The intricacy of the story of Abraham is simply staggering. These tapestries are enormous, some reaching nearly 5 meters in height and 10 meters in width. To fill such a vast canvas with detail required an army of weavers from the workshop of Willem de Panmaker. Imagine them working for years, patiently, meticulously, thread by thread. The tapestries are crowded with figures, hundreds of them, each with unique features, expressions, and elaborate costumes. The landscapes are vast and varied, showing deserts, bustling cities, and battlefields. There are detailed animals, from camels and sheep to war horses. The use of color is incredibly sophisticated with subtle gradations. Creating depth and realism, gold and silver threads were woven in to highlight the divine presence, the opulence of court life, or the gleam of armor, making the tapestries literally sparkle. For Charles V, these tapestries were more than just religious art. They were a powerful visual narrative that paralleled his own life as a divinely chosen ruler, embarking on great journeys, fighting battles, and seeking to establish a lasting legacy. They were displayed on the grandest occasions, rolling out across vast palace walls, silently proclaiming the emperor's piety, his power, and his connection to the great figures of sacred history. They continue to represent the pinnacle of Renaissance tapestry weaving, a monumental achievement in textile art. Number 1. The Conquest of Tunis. In the year 1535, Emperor Charles V achieved one of the most celebrated military victories of his reign, the capture of Tunis from the Ottoman-backed pirate Barbarossa. Charles wasn't just going to let this victory fade into history books. He wanted it immortalized in the most spectacular and technologically advanced way possible. That's how the Conquest of Tunis tapestry series was born, a project so ambitious it took an entire decade to complete. This wasn't just art, it was propaganda, a living, breathing, woven monument to imperial power. Charles commissioned the designs from Jan Cornelis Vermeyen, an artist who actually accompanied the expedition to Tunis. Vermeyen sketched the landscapes, the troops, the ships, and even the faces of the key figures, making these tapestries incredibly accurate historical documents. Once the detailed cartoons were ready, the colossal task of weaving began in the workshop of Willem de Panmaker in Brussels, the most prestigious tapestry workshop of the era. The series consists of 12 immense tapestries, each depicting a specific stage of the campaign: the departure from Barcelona, the landing at Goleta, the liberation of Christian prisoners, and Charles V's triumphant entry into Tunis. The intricacy of these tapestries is legendary. They are vast, some reaching over 5 meters in height and 9 meters in width. To fill such immense spaces with historical accuracy and dramatic flair required an unparalleled mastery of the craft. Imagine thousands of soldiers, each distinct with detailed armor and weapons, hundreds of ships, each with rigging and sails rendered with precision. The chaotic energy of battle, with horses rearing and cannons firing, is miraculously translated into still threads. Vermeyen's sketches meant that identifiable figures, including Charles V himself, are depicted with incredible likeness, almost like woven portraits. The colors are vibrant, the details meticulously rendered, and shimmering gold and silver threads are used extensively to convey the richness of the armor, the royal standards, and the wealth of the imperial court. These tapestries were not just hung in a palace. They traveled with Charles V, unfurled, to impress rival monarchs and to remind his own subjects of his unparalleled glory and divine favor. They were displayed in places like the Vatican, announcing the emperor's might to the very Pope. The Conquest of Tunis is not merely a collection of beautiful textiles. It is a triumphant, meticulously documented, and awe-inspiring historical narrative woven into existence for an emperor who understood that true power wasn't just held, but also vividly displayed for all the world to see.